March 2023. The spring thaw had come early to Crescent Lake, Minnesota, revealing what the ice had hidden for nearly 4 decades. Detective Sarah Chen stood at the water's edge, her breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air as the dive team surfaced with their grim discovery. "We've got something down here," the lead diver's voice crackled through the radio. "It's a vehicle, late 70s model, Minnesota plates still visible." What began as a routine search following an anonymous tip had just unearthed the answer to one of Minnesota's most haunting mysteries. Inside that submerged car, preserved by the lake's cold depths, were the remains of 2 young women who had vanished without a trace in 1985, and in the glove compartment, perfectly preserved in a waterproof case, was a driver's license bearing the name Jennifer Walsh. For 38 years, the disappearance of best friends Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton had been nothing but unanswered questions. 2 bright college students who simply vanished one frigid February night after leaving a campus party. 2 empty seats at graduation ceremonies. 2 families frozen in time, unable to move forward, unable to let go. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and smash the like icon. Your support helps us tell these important stories, and it ensures you won't miss future cases that deserve attention. The discovery at Crescent Lake wasn't just the closing of a missing persons case. It was the beginning of an investigation that would expose a web of lies, cover-ups, and betrayals that had festered in this tight-knit college town for nearly 4 decades. Because when authorities finally identified who was responsible and made an arrest in 2023, it wasn't a random stranger or an unknown predator. It was someone who had attended every candlelight vigil, comforted the grieving families, and carried this devastating secret while living a respected life in the very community they had traumatized. The Walsh-Thornton case represents more than just a solved mystery. It stands as a testament to the power of anonymous tips, the advancement of underwater forensic recovery, and the determination of a new generation of investigators who refuse to let this case remain buried beneath the surface. This is also a story about the hidden dangers of the 1980s college party scene, about the silence that protected predators, and about how assumptions and rushed conclusions allowed a killer to hide in plain sight for 38 years. What makes this case particularly chilling is how the answer was literally submerged in a location that had been searched repeatedly. The key suspect had even participated in some of those early searches, standing shoulder to shoulder with volunteers while secretly knowing exactly where Jennifer and Amy lay hidden. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how these stories connect people from all corners of the world. Tonight, we'll walk through the events of February 1985, trace the decades-long search for answers, and reveal the technological breakthrough and persistent detective work that finally brought justice to 2 young women whose lives were stolen just as they were beginning. This is a story of friendship, tragedy, deception, and ultimately justice that came 38 years too late, but came nonetheless. Chapter 1. The Golden Age of Innocence. Northfield, Minnesota in 1985 was a picture-perfect college town nestled along the Cannon River, about 40 miles south of Minneapolis. With a population hovering around 14,000, the town was defined by its 2 prestigious liberal arts colleges, Carleton and St. Olaf, which gave the community an intellectual vibrancy unusual for a town its size. The mid-1980s were a transformative time in American college culture. MTV had revolutionized music consumption, personal computers were beginning to appear in dorm rooms, and the drinking age had recently been raised to 21, pushing much of the campus party culture into private residences and off-campus houses. It was an era before cell phones, before social media, before the constant connectivity that would come to define later generations. Northfield prided itself on being a safe community. The town's claim to fame was its 1876 defeat of the Jesse James gang during an attempted bank robbery, an event celebrated annually during Defeat of Jesse James Days. The community's self-image was built on this legacy of ordinary citizens standing up to outlaws, of good triumphing over evil. Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton met during freshman orientation at Carleton College in September 1982. Both were English majors, both loved poetry and vintage record stores, and both had chosen Carleton specifically for its strong liberal arts program and intimate campus feel. Jennifer, from suburban Chicago, was the eldest of 3 daughters in an Irish Catholic family. Standing 5'6", with auburn hair and green eyes, she was known for her quick wit and her dream of becoming a journalist. Her dorm room walls were covered with New Yorker magazine covers and quotes from Joan Didion. She wrote for the college newspaper and had recently been promoted to features editor. Amy, a Minneapolis native, was the only child of a single mother who had worked double shifts as a nurse to afford her daughter's college education. At 5'4", with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes, Amy was quieter than Jennifer, but possessed a sharp, analytical mind. She tutored other students in writing and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her friends described her as the person who always remembered birthdays and checked in when someone seemed down. They were inseparable, but not exclusive, recalled their roommate, Lisa Henderson, in a 2023 interview. They had other friends, other interests, but there was something special about their bond. They understood each other on a level that went beyond typical college friendships. Losing both of them at once felt like losing 2 halves of the same whole. February 15, 1985, was a Friday night that began like countless others on Carleton's campus. After a week of midterm exams, students were ready to unwind. A popular off-campus house on Division Street, rented by 4 senior men, was hosting what they called a thaw party to celebrate the first break in Minnesota's brutal winter cold snap. Temperatures had climbed to an almost balmy 28 degrees after weeks below zero. Jennifer and Amy arrived at the party around 9 p.m., having walked the 6 blocks from their campus dorm with a group of friends. Security camera footage from a nearby convenience store, grainy and time-stamped, captured the group stopping to buy snacks. Jennifer is visible laughing, her arm linked with Amy's, both young women seemingly without a care in the world. The party was crowded, with an estimated 60 to 70 students packed into the small house. Music blared from speakers in every room. Red Solo cups were ubiquitous. The atmosphere was typical of mid-1980s college parties, chaotic, loud, and largely unsupervised. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Jennifer and Amy throughout the evening. They danced in the living room, chatted with friends in the kitchen, and at one point were seen outside on the porch, talking with a small group. Nothing seemed amiss. Nothing appeared unusual. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Jennifer told several friends she and Amy were planning to leave soon. "We have early library shifts tomorrow," she explained to Lisa Henderson. "Just want to make one more round, and then we're heading out." That was the last time Lisa, or anyone else who came forward, saw Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton alive. When the 2 women failed to show up for their Saturday morning library shifts, their supervisor wasn't immediately concerned. College students occasionally overslept after parties, though it was unusual for both Jennifer and Amy, who were known for their reliability. By Saturday afternoon, when neither had returned to their dorm room and weren't answering their door, their friends grew worried. Lisa Henderson enlisted help from their floor's resident assistant to check the room. Everything appeared normal. Both beds were still made from the previous morning. Their coats were missing, consistent with having worn them to the party. But their keys, wallets, and identification were in their room, which seemed odd. By Saturday evening, with still no sign of either woman, friends contacted campus security, who in turn notified the Northfield Police Department. What started as a missing persons report would soon become one of Minnesota's most perplexing cold cases. The initial investigation moved quickly. Police interviewed dozens of party attendees, trying to piece together Jennifer and Amy's movements that Friday night. The timeline they constructed was frustratingly incomplete. The last confirmed sighting placed both women at the Division Street house party at approximately 11:45 p.m. A witness reported seeing them putting on their coats in the front hallway, apparently preparing to leave. After that, they simply vanished. The 6-block route from the party house back to campus was searched meticulously. Every alley, every building entrance, every potential place 2 young women might have taken shelter was examined. Nothing. Jennifer's 1979 Honda Civic, which she'd parked in a campus lot that Friday afternoon, remained untouched. Amy didn't own a car. Both women's winter coats were missing, along with Jennifer's distinctive purple scarf that multiple people remembered her wearing at the party. "It was as if they evaporated," said Detective Robert Lindstrom, who led the initial investigation. "No bodies, no crime scene, no witnesses to anything suspicious. Just 2 young women who left a party and were never seen again." The investigation's early days were complicated by the party environment. Many students had been drinking, and their memories of the evening were hazy. Some were reluctant to speak with police, fearing disciplinary action for underage drinking. Others provided contradictory accounts, remembering seeing Jennifer and Amy at times that didn't align with other witnesses' statements. One lead emerged that would define the investigation for years to come: reports of a creepy older guy at the party. Multiple students mentioned seeing a man in his late 20s or early 30s who didn't appear to be a Carleton student. He was described as approximately 6 feet tall, with dark hair and a leather jacket. Some witnesses recalled seeing him talking with Jennifer and Amy at various points during the evening. "He didn't fit in," one partygoer told police. "College parties have a vibe, you know. He seemed too old, too focused. Not there to have fun, but watching people." This mysterious stranger became the investigation's primary focus. Police created a composite sketch based on witness descriptions and distributed it throughout the region. Tips poured in, each one followed up, each one leading nowhere. Meanwhile, Jennifer's and Amy's families arrived in Northfield, transforming from ordinary parents into desperate searchers overnight. Patrick and Maureen Walsh drove up from Chicago, while Amy's mother, Carleton Thornton, made the short trip from Minneapolis. All 3 would remain in Northfield for weeks, organizing search parties, distributing missing persons flyers, and begging anyone with information to come forward. The campus and broader Northfield community rallied around the search. Hundreds of volunteers combed the surrounding countryside, checking abandoned buildings, searching wooded areas, and walking the banks of the Cannon River. Local businesses displayed missing persons posters in their windows. The college held vigils where students gathered to light candles and pray for their classmates' safe return. As days turned to weeks with no breakthrough, a grim reality began to set in. The likelihood of finding Jennifer and Amy alive diminished with each passing hour. Yet without bodies, without a crime scene, without any physical evidence of foul play, the investigation had nowhere to go. What time are you watching this? Day or night, there are families out there still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. Every case deserves to be remembered. By March 1985, the intensive search had scaled back. The FBI had been consulted, but found nothing to suggest the disappearance was connected to any known serial offenders. The composite sketch of the mysterious party guest had generated hundreds of tips but no concrete leads. The trail had gone cold. For the Walsh and Thornton families, March marked the beginning of a nightmare that would last 38 years. The transition from hope to uncertainty, from grief to a strange limbo where their daughters were neither confirmed dead nor alive, but simply gone. Chapter 2. Lives suspended in time. The Walsh family home in Oak Park, Illinois, had always been filled with noise. 3 daughters, countless friends cycling through, music, laughter, arguments, and reconciliations. After Jennifer disappeared, silence moved in, like an unwelcome guest. Patrick Walsh had worked as a civil engineer for the same Chicago firm for 20 years. He was a practical man who believed problems could be solved through logic, planning, and hard work. His daughter's disappearance challenged everything he thought he understood about how the world operated. "My father was never the same," said Jennifer's younger sister, Katie Walsh Morrison, in a 2023 interview. "He became obsessed with finding answers. Every vacation day, every weekend, he was in Minnesota following leads. He taught himself investigative techniques, created his own files, interviewed people the police had already talked to. It consumed him." Patrick converted the family's basement into a command center. Maps of Northfield and surrounding areas covered the walls, marked with color-coded pins, red for areas searched, blue for potential locations, yellow for reported sightings. Filing cabinets held meticulously organized documents, interview notes, newspaper clippings, and correspondence with law enforcement. He established a dedicated phone line with an answering machine, the number distributed on thousands of flyers. Even years later, long after most leads had dried up, Patrick checked that answering machine daily, hoping for the one call that would break the case open. Maureen Walsh channeled her grief differently. A devout Catholic who had raised her daughters in the church, she found what solace she could in prayer. She attended daily mass, lit candles for Jennifer, and maintained an unwavering belief that her daughter would one day be found. Jennifer's bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it. Her clothes hung in the closet. Her books lined the shelves. Her childhood stuffed animals sat arranged on the bed. Maureen changed the sheets weekly and dusted regularly, maintaining the room as a shrine to a daughter who might never return to it. "Mom couldn't accept that Jen was gone," Katie explained. "She'd set a place for her at holiday dinners. She'd buy birthday presents and wrap them, storing them in the basement. She lived in this state of suspended grief, never quite acknowledging that Jennifer might not be coming home." The Walsh family's suffering rippled through their community. Friends didn't know what to say. So many said nothing, crossing the street to avoid uncomfortable encounters. Invitations to social events dwindled as the Walshes became defined by their tragedy. Even within the family, Jennifer's disappearance created fault lines. Her two younger sisters struggled with survivors' guilt and resentment at being unable to help their parents heal. Katie was 17 when Jennifer vanished, a high school junior preparing for college applications. She abandoned her plans to attend Carleton, the school forever associated with her sister's disappearance, choosing instead to stay close to home at Northwestern University. Even that decision felt like a betrayal, prioritizing her own safety over supporting her parents' continued search efforts. Jennifer's youngest sister, Bridget, was only 14 in 1985. She grew up in a household defined by absence, her adolescence and young adulthood overshadowed by a sister she barely remembered. "I felt like I was competing with a ghost," Bridget admitted. "Everything I accomplished felt diminished because Jen wasn't there to accomplish it too. My parents tried to be present for me, but part of them was always in Minnesota, always searching." Catherine Thornton faced her own private hell. As a single mother who had sacrificed everything to give Amy opportunities, she struggled with guilt. Had she pushed her daughter too hard? Had sending Amy to an expensive private college made her vulnerable? The what-ifs and if-onlys tormented her. Catherine took a leave of absence from her nursing job at Hennepin County Medical Center, eventually resigning when she couldn't bring herself to return. She moved to Northfield temporarily, renting a small apartment near campus so she could be close to where Amy had last been seen. Catherine basically put her life on hold, recalled her sister, Margaret Thornton Davis. She spent every day retracing Amy's steps, talking to students, searching places that had already been searched 100 times. She was convinced, if she just looked hard enough, she'd find something everyone else had missed. The financial burden added to Catherine's emotional toll. Amy's college tuition had already stretched their finances. Now, with legal fees for a lawyer to advocate with police, travel expenses, and lost income from her job, Catherine fell into debt she'd spend years trying to recover from. Unlike the Walshes, Catherine didn't have the luxury of maintaining Amy's childhood room as a shrine. She'd downsized to a smaller apartment after Amy left for college. Most of Amy's belongings had been packed in boxes in storage. After the disappearance, Catherine couldn't bear to open those boxes, to confront the physical remnants of her daughter's abbreviated life. What united the Walsh and Thornton families was their complicated relationship with hope. To hope meant remaining in a state of uncertainty, unable to grieve, unable to achieve closure. To abandon hope felt like abandoning their daughters. They existed in a liminal space, neither moving forward nor able to go back. The families maintained regular contact throughout the decades, united by their shared tragedy. They marked anniversaries together, attended annual memorial services, and supported each other through the darkest moments. Yet even this connection was tinged with complicated emotions. Seeing each other meant being reminded of what they'd lost, of the friendship between Jennifer and Amy that had been so beautiful, and was now the source of so much pain. If this story is hitting home for you, make sure you're subscribed and you've turned on notifications. These families' stories deserve to be told, and your support helps make sure these victims are never forgotten. For nearly 4 decades, the Walsh and Thornton families lived in a state of suspended animation. Birthdays passed unmarked. Milestones went uncelebrated. The simple question, "How many children do you have?" became a minefield. Do you count the missing daughter? Do you speak of her in past or present tense? Both families aged rapidly under the weight of their grief and uncertainty. Patrick Walsh's hair turned white in his 50s. Maureen developed chronic health issues her doctors attributed to stress. Catherine Thornton aged into a woman much older than her years, her face marked by decades of worry and sleepless nights. Yet they never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that somewhere, somehow, answers existed. Chapter 3. The Long Shadow of the 1980s. Northfield, Minnesota transformed significantly in the decades following Jennifer and Amy's disappearance. The sleepy college town of 1985 gradually evolved into a more modern community, though it retained much of its small-town character. The physical landscape changed. The Division Street house, where the fateful party took place, was torn down in 1992, replaced by a modern duplex. Murphy's Bar, a popular student hangout near campus, closed in 1999. The convenience store where security footage captured Jennifer and Amy's last carefree moments was bought by a national chain and renovated beyond recognition. Through all these changes, the disappearance of Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton remained an open wound in the community's consciousness. Each freshman class learned the story during orientation safety presentations. Local parents used it as a cautionary tale when their own children prepared for college. Anniversary articles appeared in the Northfield News every February, keeping the memory alive, even as details faded and witnesses moved away or passed on. The investigation never officially closed, but it ebbed and flowed with the resources available and the leads that emerged. Every few years, renewed attention would spark hope, only to fade once again into frustration. In 1990, the case received its first major review when DNA profiling technology became available. Evidence collected in 1985, mostly items from Jennifer's car and the women's dorm room, was re-examined using these new techniques. Unfortunately, none of the evidence yielded profiles that could be compared to suspects. Without a crime scene, without biological evidence from an assault or struggle, DNA technology couldn't provide the breakthrough investigators hoped for. The early 1990s brought another potential lead when a convicted murderer in Wisconsin claimed to have information about the missing Carleton students. Gerald Hoffman, serving life for killing 2 women in Milwaukee, told investigators he'd been in Minnesota in early 1985 and implied he knew what happened to Jennifer and Amy. Patrick Walsh and Catherine Thornton endured agonizing months as police investigated Hoffman's claims. Ultimately, investigators determined Hoffman was fabricating his story, seeking attention and hoping to leverage false information for better prison conditions. The lead evaporated, leaving the families devastated once again. In 1997, construction workers excavating for a new development outside Northfield discovered human remains. For 3 terrible days, the Walsh and Thornton families braced for confirmation that their daughters had finally been found. Forensic analysis determined the bones were those of a Native American individual who had died at least a century earlier. Relief mixed with disappointment in an emotional cocktail the families had become grimly familiar with. The turn of the millennium brought hope in the form of cold case units. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension established a dedicated team in 2001, and the Walsh-Thornton case was among the first files reviewed. Detective Raymond Moore led this new examination, bringing fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques to evidence that had sat largely untouched for 16 years. Moore's team digitized all documents, creating a searchable database that could cross-reference witness statements and timeline details more efficiently than the paper filing system from 1985. We started from scratch, questioning every assumption made in the original investigation, Moore explained in a 2020 interview. Sometimes the longest cold cases go unsolved because early investigators made reasonable but incorrect assumptions that sent the entire inquiry down the wrong path. Moore's team identified several areas where the original investigation had potentially missed opportunities. The focus on the mysterious stranger at the party may have diverted attention from people who were more integrated into the students' lives. The assumption that Jennifer and Amy left the party together wasn't definitively confirmed. It was simply what made logical sense. Most significantly, Moore questioned the geographic scope of the original search. Most efforts had focused on the campus area and routes the women would have walked. But what if they hadn't walked? What if they'd accepted a ride from someone, either by choice or coercion? That possibility would dramatically expand the search area and the pool of potential suspects. Moore's team re-interviewed dozens of people, including many who had been at the party that February night in 1985. Memories had faded after 16 years, but some individuals came forward with details they'd been uncomfortable sharing in the immediate aftermath. Several students admitted they'd been too impaired to provide reliable statements in 1985. Others confessed they hadn't wanted to admit behaviors, like drug use, that might have gotten them in trouble. These re-interviews yielded one intriguing new lead. A former student, now living in California, contacted Moore's team after seeing news coverage about the case review. This witness, Emily Jacobson, admitted she'd never come forward in 1985 because she was terrified it would derail her graduate school applications. Jacobson revealed she'd been outside the party house around midnight on February 15, 1985, having stepped out to make a phone call from a nearby payphone, the pre-cell phone era detail that seems almost quaint now. She witnessed Jennifer and Amy standing by a car parked on Division Street, talking with someone in the driver's seat. "I remember it clearly because I thought it was odd," Jacobson told investigators. "It was cold out, and they were standing there chatting like they knew the person, not like someone catcalling them or being creepy. They seemed comfortable. After a minute or so, they both got in the car, the passenger side, one in front and one in back. The car drove off, headed toward downtown, not toward campus. This revelation was potentially explosive. It suggested Jennifer and Amy hadn't simply vanished while walking home. They'd willingly gotten into a vehicle with someone they appeared to know and trust, someone who then drove them away from the direction of campus. Jacobson's description of the vehicle, however, was vague. A dark-colored sedan, maybe blue or black, ordinary-looking, probably American-made. In 1985, before the proliferation of foreign cars, this described thousands of vehicles in the area. More frustratingly, Jacobson couldn't describe the driver. "I only saw the back of their head through the car window. Dark hair, I think. Could have been a man or a woman. I was far enough away that I didn't see any details." Despite its limitations, this new testimony shifted the investigation's focus. If Jennifer and Amy had gotten into a car with someone they knew, the suspect pool narrowed significantly. The mystery stranger theory lost credibility. Investigators began looking more closely at people within the students' extended social circle. Classmates, professors, local residents who interacted with students, anyone who might have been at that party and had access to a dark sedan. This line of inquiry led to another review of vehicle registrations from 1985, focusing on people with connections to Carleton College. The list was extensive, but one name that appeared would later prove significant: David Morrison, a 28-year-old graduate teaching assistant in Carleton's English department. Morrison had been interviewed briefly in 1985, as had many faculty and staff members. He confirmed he'd been at the Division Street party, said he spoke with several students, including Jennifer Walsh, briefly, and stated he left the party alone around 11 p.m., going home to the apartment he shared with his wife. His wife, Linda Morrison, corroborated his account. Morrison owned a 1982 dark blue Ford LTD that matched the general description Jacobson had provided, but so did many others. Without evidence connecting Morrison directly to the women's disappearance, the investigation couldn't proceed further in that direction. By 2005, Moore's cold case review had exhausted its most promising leads. The Jacobson testimony was valuable for establishing that Jennifer and Amy had likely left in a vehicle, but without identifying that vehicle or its driver definitively, the case remained stalled. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the investigation continued in fits and starts. Occasional tips came in, each dutifully followed up, each ultimately leading nowhere. The Walsh and Thornton families aged, their hope weathering but never entirely extinguishing. The case took on an almost mythical quality in Northfield. Younger residents who hadn't lived through the original disappearance knew the story as local legend. Urban myths grew around it. Jennifer and Amy had run away to start new lives. They'd been abducted by a serial killer passing through. They'd stumbled into a criminal operation and been silenced. None of these theories had evidence to support them, but they filled the vacuum left by the absence of facts. Crescent Lake, located about 15 miles northwest of Northfield, became an unofficial memorial site. The lake, a popular recreation spot in summer and ice fishing destination in winter, held no obvious connection to the missing women. Yet people sometimes left flowers on the small public beach or mentioned Jennifer and Amy's names in prayers at the lakeside pavilion. It was as if the community needed a physical place to focus their collective grief, and Crescent Lake, beautiful and serene, served that purpose. No one imagined that beneath that lake's placid surface, hidden in 60 feet of cold Minnesota water, lay the answer everyone had been searching for. Hit that like button if you think cold cases deserve ongoing investigation. Every unsolved case represents a family still waiting, still wondering, still hoping for closure. By 2020, both Patrick Walsh and Catherine Thornton were in their 80s. Both had survived health scares. Both knew time was running out for them to get answers about what happened to their daughters. The 35th anniversary of the disappearance in February 2020 brought another round of media coverage, another plea for information, another year of waiting. Then came the anonymous tip that would change everything. Chapter 4. The lake gives up its secrets. The email arrived in the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's tip line at 2:47 a.m. on February 18, 2023. Sent from a burner email account that would later prove untraceable, it contained just 2 sentences. Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton are in Crescent Lake. Check the deepest point on the northwest side. Detective Sarah Chen, who had inherited the Walsh-Thornton case when Raymond Moore retired in 2018, saw the email when she arrived at work that morning. She'd received dozens of tips over the years, most of them well-intentioned but ultimately useless. This one felt different. Crescent Lake had been searched in 1985, of course. Divers had checked the accessible areas near the shore, but 1985 sonar technology was primitive compared to modern equipment, and the deepest sections of the lake, some reaching 80 feet, had been deemed unlikely locations since there was no evidence connecting the missing women to the lake. We'd learned to take tips seriously, even when they seemed far-fetched, Chen explained. And something about the specificity of this one, the exact location, the quiet confidence of it, made me think the sender knew something concrete. Chen brought the tip to her supervisor, who authorized a preliminary investigation. On March 3, 2023, a team arrived at Crescent Lake, equipped with modern side-scan sonar, capable of creating detailed images of the lake bottom. The northwest section of Crescent Lake is the deepest part, dropping to approximately 75 feet. In winter, this area is popular with ice fishers, who drill through 3 feet of ice to reach the deep water below. In summer, it's avoided by swimmers and boaters due to the steep drop-off and cold temperatures, even at the surface. The sonar operator, a specialist from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, made the initial discovery within 2 hours of beginning the scan. "I've seen a lot of things on lake bottoms," he told reporters later. "Shopping carts, safes, old boats. But when that image came up on the screen, showing a vehicle at 62 feet, perfectly upright, I knew this was something significant. The sonar image clearly showed a sedan, its outline remarkably preserved. Even more striking was its position. The car sat perfectly level on a relatively flat section of the lake bottom, as if it had been gently placed there rather than having crashed or rolled in. A dive team was assembled immediately. Ice divers, specially trained for cold water operations, would enter through a hole cut in the ice and descend to the vehicle. The operation was dangerous, complicated by the depth, near freezing water temperature, and limited visibility. Detective Chen stood on the ice watching as the divers descended. "I'd worked this case for 5 years, she recalled. "I'd read every file, interviewed every living witness, chased down every lead. I'd studied photos of Jennifer and Amy until I felt like I knew them personally. Standing there, waiting for confirmation, I felt the weight of 38 years of waiting." The lead diver, Jason Torres, reached the vehicle after a careful descent through the murky water. His helmet camera captured every moment, footage that would later be used in court. The car was a 1979 Honda Civic, its paint darkened by nearly 4 decades underwater, but its structure remarkably intact. The cold water and silt that had partially buried the vehicle had preserved it in a grotesque time capsule. Torres swam to the driver's side window, shining his light inside. Through the glass, he could see skeletal remains in the front and back seats, still wearing remnants of winter clothing. The bodies appeared to have been positioned deliberately, seat-belted in place. "This is definitely the scene," Torres reported through his radio. 2 individuals in the vehicle, proceeding with documentation before recovery. The recovery operation took 3 days. A crane was positioned on the ice, its weight carefully distributed. Divers attached cables to the submerged Honda. Slowly, carefully, the vehicle was raised from its watery grave. As the car broke the surface, decades of Crescent Lake silt cascading off its roof and hood, the assembled law enforcement personnel fell silent. They were witnessing the end of one of Minnesota's longest-running mysteries. The Honda was transported to a secure forensic facility where a team of specialists could examine it under controlled conditions. The license plate, miraculously still attached and readable after 38 years underwater, confirmed what everyone already suspected. This was Jennifer Walsh's 1979 Honda Civic. The forensic examination revealed crucial details. Both victims showed evidence of blunt force trauma to their skulls, delivered from behind. The pathologist determined these injuries would have been incapacitating, but not immediately fatal, suggesting Jennifer and Amy had been attacked, rendered unconscious, and then placed in the vehicle while still alive. The car had been driven into the lake at a point where the bottom dropped sharply. Examination of the steering wheel and pedals showed no signs of operational control when the car entered the water. It had been in neutral, likely pushed by another vehicle. Once in the water, it would have sunk quickly, settling on the bottom where it would remain undisturbed for 38 years. But it was what forensic teams found in the trunk that would crack the case wide open. A metal toolbox, rusted but intact, contained items clearly meant to weigh down the vehicle to ensure it stayed submerged. More importantly, one of those items, a wrench, had been wrapped in fabric to prevent clanging. That fabric, preserved by being inside the sealed toolbox, was a checkered flannel shirt. DNA analysis of the shirt revealed epithelial cells from sweat and skin cells left by whoever had worn it. After 38 years, technology could extract a usable DNA profile from those cells. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains genetic profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and evidence from unsolved crimes. The system found a match within 24 hours. The DNA on the shirt belonged to David Morrison, the former Carleton teaching assistant who had been interviewed briefly in 1985 and never seriously pursued as a suspect. David Morrison had lived a seemingly exemplary life in the decades since Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton disappeared. He'd completed his PhD in English literature, taught at various colleges across the Midwest, and eventually settled into a position as a full professor at a small liberal arts college in Wisconsin. He had retired in 2018, living with his second wife. He'd divorced Linda in 1994, in a comfortable home near Eau Claire. He volunteered at the local library, attended community theater productions, and was known as a genial neighbor who kept a beautiful garden. He had also been hiding a terrible secret for 38 years. When the DNA match came back, Detective Chen and her team moved quickly to build their case before attempting an arrest. They re-examined all evidence related to Morrison, re-interviewed his ex-wife Linda, and constructed a timeline of his activities in February 1985. What emerged was a picture of a man who had carefully cultivated an image of respectability while harboring darker impulses. Former students from Carleton, when re-interviewed, described Morrison as someone who paid inappropriate attention to female students, particularly those in his sections. Several women reported uncomfortable interactions, including unwanted invitations to private conferences about their work and comments about their appearance that crossed professional boundaries. Jennifer Walsh had been enrolled in Morrison's Contemporary American Literature Seminar in the fall of 1984. According to her journal, discovered among her preserved belongings, she had found Morrison's attention creepy and had considered dropping the class. She ultimately stayed, earning an A, but noted that Morrison had asked her to coffee multiple times, invitations she declined. The investigation revealed that Morrison's alibi for February 15, 1985, had never been thoroughly verified. His then-wife Linda had confirmed he came home around 11 p.m. that night, but investigators in 2023 learned something the 1985 team hadn't known. Linda Morrison had been taking sleeping pills regularly during that period due to insomnia. She typically took her medication around 10 p.m. and slept heavily through the night. When re-interviewed in 2023, Linda Morrison, now Linda Peterson, after remarrying, was confronted with this information. I realize now that I have no actual memory of David coming home that night, she admitted. I remember telling police he was there, but I was basing that on what he told me and what I assumed. I took my sleeping pill, went to bed, and woke up in the morning with him there. He could have left after I fell asleep and returned before dawn, and I wouldn't have known. The forensic team's examination of Jennifer's Honda revealed additional damning evidence. Soil samples from the undercarriage contained particles consistent with the unpaved road leading to the boat launch at Crescent Lake. More significantly, the car's odometer showed minimal mileage beyond what would be expected for the drive from campus to the lake, suggesting Jennifer hadn't driven far before being attacked. Tire impression analysis on the lake bottom showed evidence of a second vehicle's tracks near where the Honda had entered the water. While decades underwater had degraded the impressions, forensic specialists determined they were consistent with a larger sedan, matching the general specifications of Morrison's 1982 Ford LTD. Perhaps most chilling was evidence found in Morrison's current residence when investigators obtained a search warrant. In a locked file cabinet in his home office, Morrison had kept a manila folder containing newspaper clippings about Jennifer and Amy's disappearance. Every article, every anniversary piece, every update about the investigation had been carefully cut out and preserved. Also in the folder were photographs Morrison had apparently taken of Jennifer Walsh throughout the fall 1984 semester. The photos showed Jennifer walking across campus, sitting in the library, eating in the cafeteria, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Jennifer appeared unaware she was being photographed in any of them. The collection documented an obsession that had clearly festered beneath Morrison's professional facade. The arrest came on March 28, 2023. Detective Chen led a team to Morrison's home in the early morning hours. Morrison, now 66 years old and grey-haired, showed no surprise when officers arrived. In fact, witnesses reported he seemed almost relieved. "I've been waiting for this," he said as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. These were his only words before invoking his right to an attorney. The news of Morrison's arrest sent shockwaves through multiple communities. In Northfield, where many residents still remembered the case firsthand, the revelation that a respected teaching assistant had been responsible left people reeling. Former colleagues and students struggled to reconcile the mild-mannered academic they'd known with the monster capable of such violence. "He taught me 20th century poetry," said one former student, now in her 60s. "I remember him as passionate about literature, someone who made difficult texts accessible. To learn he murdered 2 of his students is beyond comprehension. How do you square those 2 versions of the same person?" In the academic community, where Morrison had spent his career, colleagues felt betrayed and horrified. Universities where he'd taught launched reviews to determine if there had been other warning signs, other victims whose concerns had been dismissed or ignored. For Patrick Walsh, now 89 years old and in declining health, the arrest brought a flood of emotions. "For 38 years, I imagined this moment," he told reporters from his hospital bed, where he was being treated for pneumonia. "I thought I'd feel satisfaction, or relief, or even rage. Instead, I just feel tired and grateful that I lived long enough to see this day." Carleton Thornton, 86, was more direct in her reaction. "That man stole everything from Amy, her future, her dreams, her chance to live. He stole 38 years from me, years I spent wondering and waiting and hoping. I hope he suffers every remaining day of his life with the knowledge of what he took from us." The case that emerged from the investigation painted a disturbing picture of premeditation and cold calculation. Morrison had become fixated on Jennifer Walsh during the fall 1984 semester. Her repeated rejections of his advances had transformed his attraction into something darker, a desire to control and ultimately to possess. According to the prosecution's theory, Morrison had attended the Division Street party, specifically hoping to encounter Jennifer. When he saw her and Amy preparing to leave, he offered them a ride, playing on his role as a teaching assistant to establish trust. Jennifer, recognizing him and having no reason to suspect danger from a faculty member, accepted. Instead of driving them to campus, Morrison diverted to a remote location, possibly the area near Crescent Lake, where he attacked both women from behind. The prosecution theorized that Amy was collateral damage, a witness who had to be eliminated. Morrison then placed both women, still alive but unconscious, into Jennifer's Honda. He drove the car to Crescent Lake's boat launch, pushed it into the water, and watched as it sank into the depths, taking his secret with it. He then returned to his home, arriving before dawn, and slipped into bed beside his sleeping wife, who would unknowingly provide his alibi. For 38 years, Morrison had lived with this secret, attending vigils for his victims, watching their families suffer, while maintaining his facade of normalcy. The discovery at Crescent Lake had finally exposed the truth he'd kept buried, as surely as Jennifer and Amy had been buried beneath the water. This case shows why we can never give up. On cold cases, subscribe and share this video to help keep attention on unsolved crimes. Your support brings these stories to light. Chapter 5. The Weight of Secrets. The revelation of David Morrison's double life forced a painful reckoning in multiple communities. How had he evaded suspicion for nearly 4 decades? What warning signs had been missed? And most haunting of all, had there been other victims? Former colleagues began coming forward with stories that, in retrospect, painted a troubling pattern. Dr. Rebecca Halstead, who had shared an office suite with Morrison at a Wisconsin college in the 1990s, recalled several female students complaining about his behavior. They'd say he made them uncomfortable, that he'd stand too close or ask personal questions, Halstead explained. But he was careful. Nothing explicitly sexual, nothing you could definitely point to as harassment, just this persistent boundary crossing that left students feeling uneasy. When Halstead had raised concerns with the department chair, she was told that Morrison was old-fashioned in his mentoring style and that the complaints were likely misunderstandings. No formal investigation ever occurred. This pattern repeated across Morrison's career. At least a dozen women came forward with similar accounts spanning 3 decades. He'd been skilled at operating just within the boundaries of acceptable behavior, leaving his targets feeling uncomfortable but uncertain whether they had grounds for complaint. The investigation expanded to determine whether Morrison had committed other crimes. His financial records, phone records, and travel history were meticulously examined. FBI behavioral analysts studied his pattern of life, looking for gaps that might indicate additional victims. Detectives checked missing persons cases from every location where Morrison had lived or worked. They found no definitive links, though several unsolved cases from the 1980s and 1990s shared troubling similarities. Young women who disappeared near colleges, where Morrison had connections, bodies never found, investigations that stalled for lack of evidence. These cases remained officially unsolved, but the working theory among investigators was that Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton likely weren't Morrison's only victims, just the only ones whose remains had been recovered. Morrison's ex-wife, Linda, faced intense media scrutiny and public judgment. Many questioned how she could have lived with Morrison for 9 years, bearing 2 children with him without suspecting anything. The reality, as trauma experts explained, was more complex. Abusers are often skilled compartmentalizers, explained Dr. Patricia Wong, a psychologist specializing in intimate partner violence. They can be attentive partners and parents at home while committing horrific acts outside that domestic sphere. Linda Morrison was likely a victim herself, even if she didn't suffer physical violence. Indeed, when detectives dug deeper into the Morrison marriage, A picture emerged of subtle control and psychological manipulation. Morrison had monitored Linda's whereabouts, discouraged her from maintaining friendships, and criticized her in ways that eroded her confidence. The sleeping pills she took in the 1980s had been prescribed after Morrison repeatedly told her she was too anxious and too emotional. Their divorce in 1994 had been initiated by Linda after years of feeling invisible in her own marriage. She had no knowledge of Morrison's crime and was horrified to learn the truth. "I shared a bed with a murderer," she told investigators. "I raised children with him. How do I reconcile that? How do I tell my adult children who their father really is?" Morrison's 2 children, both in their 30s by the time of his arrest, faced their own crisis of identity. Their father wasn't the man they'd thought he was. Every childhood memory became suspect. Every expression of parental love now seemed like a lie. "It's like retroactive gaslighting," Morrison's daughter told a therapist. "My entire understanding of my family history has been revealed as fiction. Who was I really growing up with? What else was he capable of?" For the Walsh and Thornton families, Morrison's arrest brought the closure they desperately sought, but it was closure wrapped in fresh pain. The details that emerged about Jennifer and Amy's final hours were agonizing to learn. Patrick Walsh requested and received a full briefing from Detective Chen. He wanted to know everything, no matter how painful. Chen spent 3 hours in the Walsh family living room, with Patrick, Maureen, and their surviving daughters present, walking through the evidence and the likely sequence of events. Jennifer fought back, Chen told them, based on defensive injuries to her skull fractures that suggested she'd turned to face her attacker. Even injured, she tried to protect herself and Amy. She was brave until the very end. For Patrick, this knowledge brought a measure of peace. His daughter hadn't gone passively into death. She'd fought. For Maureen, it reopened wounds. "She must have been so frightened," she wept. "My baby girl, alone and scared in her final moments." Catherine Thornton chose not to hear the details. "Amy is at peace now," she told Detective Chen. "I don't need to carry the burden of knowing exactly how she suffered. What I need is to see justice done." The criminal trial was scheduled for September 2023, but Morrison's defense team immediately began maneuvering for delays. They filed motions challenging the admissibility of the DNA evidence, arguing that the chain of custody for evidence stored since 1985 had been compromised. They questioned whether Morrison could receive a fair trial given the extensive media coverage. Judge Robert Hendricks denied most of these motions, ruling that the evidence had been properly maintained and that Morrison's right to a speedy trial outweighed concerns about publicity. The trial would proceed as scheduled. As the trial date approached, the prosecution assembled their case. The physical evidence was strong. Morrison's DNA on the flannel shirt found in the trunk, tire impressions consistent with his vehicle, soil samples linking Jennifer's car to Crescent Lake. The circumstantial evidence was equally compelling. His documented obsession with Jennifer Walsh, his opportunity to commit the crime, his presence at the party that night. The defense strategy became clear in pre-trial hearings. Morrison's attorneys would argue that while their client may have known the victims and may have even had inappropriate feelings toward Jennifer, this didn't make him a murderer. They would suggest that the DNA evidence, while concerning, could have innocent explanations. Perhaps Morrison had loaned someone his shirt. Perhaps he'd been to Crescent Lake for legitimate reasons. They would argue that after 38 years, memories were unreliable, evidence was degraded, and reasonable doubt existed. In the American justice system, they reminded the court, the burden of proof rested entirely with the prosecution. What's the weather like where you are today? The Walsh and Thornton families endured 38 years of changing seasons before getting answers. Every spring, every summer, every autumn, every winter, They waited and wondered. As autumn leaves began to fall in Minnesota, painting Northfield in shades of orange and gold, the trial that would finally deliver justice, or fail to do so, prepared to begin. Chapter 6. Justice Delayed, September 11th, 2023. The Rice County Courthouse in Faribault, Minnesota, was filled to capacity as the trial of David Morrison commenced. Media trucks lined the streets outside. Spectators who couldn't secure seats in the courtroom watched via closed-circuit television in an overflow room. The Walsh and Thornton families sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Patrick Walsh, weakened by his recent illness, was there in a wheelchair. Maureen sat beside him, clutching a photograph of Jennifer. Catherine Thornton sat with her sister Margaret, both women holding hands throughout the proceedings. Morrison, now 66, entered the courtroom, dressed conservatively in a dark suit. His hair had gone completely white. He walked with a slight stoop, looking every bit the aging academic rather than the killer he was accused of being. He showed no emotion as he took his seat at the defense table. The prosecution team, led by Assistant Attorney General James Patterson, presented their case methodically. They started with the victims, humanizing Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton, before detailing the evidence against their accused killer. Former roommates, friends, and professors testified about Jennifer and Amy's characters, their dreams, their close friendship. Lisa Henderson, now in her late 50s, broke down while describing the last time she saw her friends alive. They were so young, so full of potential, she said through tears. They deserved to live full lives, to fall in love, to have families, to grow old. David Morrison stole all of that from them. The prosecution then walked the jury through the night of February 15th, 1985. Emily Jacobson, the witness who had seen Jennifer and Amy getting into a dark sedan, testified about her observations. Though she couldn't identify Morrison as the driver, her testimony established that the women had left with someone voluntarily, someone they trusted. Forensic experts presented the physical evidence. The DNA analyst explained how genetic material on the flannel shirt matched Morrison's profile, and calculated the odds of the DNA belonging to someone else at astronomical levels. The geological expert testified about soil samples and tire impressions. The forensic anthropologist described the injuries to the victims' skulls and what they revealed about the attack. Detective Chen walked the jury through the investigation, from the discovery at Crescent Lake to the evidence that led investigators to Morrison. She presented the photographs found in Morrison's home, showing Jennifer Walsh unaware she was being surveilled. This is the evidence of obsession, Chen testified, of a predator selecting and stalking his prey. The prosecution also presented testimony about Morrison's pattern of inappropriate behavior with female students over his career. While this evidence couldn't prove he'd murdered Jennifer and Amy, it established a pattern of boundary violations that contextualized his fixation on Jennifer. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Linda Morrison Peterson, Morrison's ex-wife. Pale and visibly shaken, she testified about the sleeping pills, about realizing she had no actual memory of her then-husband coming home the night of February 15th, 1985. She spoke about finding newspaper clippings about the case years later and asking Morrison why he kept them. He told me he'd been questioned in the investigation and wanted to follow how it developed in case police came back, Linda testified. He made it seem reasonable at the time. Now I understand he was monitoring the investigation, making sure he stayed ahead of it. The defense's cross-examination of Linda was aggressive. They suggested she was an unreliable witness, motivated by bitterness about her failed marriage. They hammered on her admission that she couldn't definitively say Morrison had left the house that night, only that she couldn't remember him being there. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Peterson, that you can't actually testify to what my client did or didn't do that night?" Morrison's attorney pressed. "That's correct," Linda admitted quietly. "But I know David. I know he's capable of deception, of leading a double life. I believe he murdered those girls, and I believe I provided his alibi unknowingly. When the prosecution rested, the defense presented a brief case, focused on creating reasonable doubt. They called witnesses who testified to Morrison's good character and contributions to his academic field. They presented their own forensic experts who questioned whether DNA could remain viable after 38 years underwater, and whether the soil samples definitively proved anything. The defense chose not to put Morrison on the stand, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. This meant the jury would never hear directly from the accused, never see him try to explain away the evidence against him. In closing arguments, Assistant Attorney General Patterson addressed the jury with controlled passion. David Morrison is a predator who used his position of authority to select victims, who carefully planned their murders, and who spent 38 years living free while 2 families suffered unbearable grief. The evidence against him is overwhelming. The DNA doesn't lie. The photographs don't lie. His pattern of behavior doesn't lie. Morrison's lead attorney countered that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and questionable science. After 38 years, can we really trust DNA extracted from a shirt that's been underwater for decades? Can we really believe memories from witnesses testifying about events from 4 decades ago? The state wants you to convict an elderly man based on reasonable suspicion, but that's not the standard. The standard is reasonable doubt, and there is ample reason to doubt this case. The jury deliberated for 4 days. During this time, the Walsh and Thornton families remained in Northfield, waiting once again. The difference was that this wait had a definite endpoint. They would have their answer, one way or another. On September 29, 2023, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the 4 persons stood to read the decision. In the matter of the state of Minnesota versus David Morrison on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Jennifer Walsh, we find the defendant guilty. Maureen Walsh gasped and clutched Patrick's hand. Catherine Thornton closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Amy Thornton, we find the defendant guilty. Morrison showed no reaction. He sat motionless as the verdict was read, his face expressionless. Judge Hendricks thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. As Morrison was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he glanced briefly at the Walsh and Thornton families. What that look conveyed, no one could say. Regret, defiance, emptiness, whatever emotion or lack thereof existed behind Morrison's eyes, it remained inscrutable. Outside the courthouse, the families addressed a crush of media. Patrick Walsh, speaking slowly and deliberately from his wheelchair, said what many had waited 38 years to hear. Justice has been done. Jennifer and Amy can rest in peace now. They will never be forgotten. Catherine Thornton added, "No sentence can restore what was taken from us. But knowing that David Morrison will spend the rest of his life in prison brings some measure of comfort. He won't hurt anyone else. He won't walk free while pretending to be something he's not." The sentencing hearing on November 10, 2023, provided an opportunity for victim impact statements. The Walsh family, including Jennifer's sisters Katie and Bridget, shared how their sister's murder had shaped and scarred their lives. Miguel Martinez, Amy's cousin, who had remained close to Catherine, spoke about the brilliant teacher and compassionate friend the world had lost. Most poignantly, Catherine Thornton addressed Morrison directly. "You took my only child," she said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "You took my reason for living, every accomplishment she might have achieved, every moment of joy she might have experienced, every life she might have touched as a teacher. You stole all of it. You are evil, and I hope you spend every remaining day of your life haunted by what you've done." Morrison declined to speak when offered the opportunity. His attorney read a brief statement, claiming Morrison maintained his innocence and planned to appeal. Judge Hendricks sentenced Morrison to 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Given Morrison's age, this was effectively a death sentence to be carried out in slow motion over whatever years remained to him. "You exploited your position of trust to prey upon young women," Judge Hendricks stated. "You murdered 2 innocent people in cold blood, then spent 38 years living among the community you traumatized, watching families suffer while you kept your terrible secret. The law provides for no adequate punishment for such calculated evil, but I can ensure you will never again walk free." Morrison was remanded to Minnesota Correctional Facility Oak Park Heights, the state's maximum security prison. There, among murderers and violent offenders, the former English professor would spend his final years. For the Walsh and Thornton families, the conviction brought the closure they'd sought, but closure proved more complicated than they'd imagined. The trial had forced them to relive their trauma in excruciating detail. New information about Jennifer and Amy's final hours had added fresh dimensions to their grief. Patrick Walsh's health continued to decline after the trial. The stress and emotional toll of the proceedings had weakened him further. He passed away peacefully on January 8, 2024, just 3 months after Morrison's sentencing. He died knowing his daughter's killer had been brought to justice, having fulfilled the promise he'd made 38 years earlier to find answers no matter how long it took. Maureen Walsh, now facing life without both her daughter and her husband, found solace in her surviving children and grandchildren. She kept Jennifer's photograph on the mantel beside Patrick's and spent her days volunteering with a victim advocacy organization, helping other families navigate the trauma of losing loved ones to violence. Catherine Thornton lived to see the first anniversary of Morrison's conviction. She passed away in her sleep on September 30th, 2024, exactly 1 year and 1 day after the guilty verdict was read. Those close to her believed she had held on long enough to see justice done, and only then allowed herself to let go and join her daughter. This case reminds us that justice matters, no matter how long it takes. Make sure you're subscribed and you've hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this. Epilogue. Ripples across time. The resolution of the Walsh-Thornton case sent ripples far beyond Northfield, Minnesota. It became a landmark case studied in law enforcement academies, forensic science programs, and criminal justice courses across the country. The case demonstrated the importance of preserving evidence properly, even when investigative techniques don't exist to analyze it. The DNA profile that convicted Morrison could only be extracted because the flannel shirt had been sealed in a waterproof container. Had it been stored differently, the genetic material would have degraded beyond usefulness. The case also highlighted the value of anonymous tips. Despite extensive investigation and surveillance, law enforcement had never seriously considered Crescent Lake as a disposal site. The anonymous tipster, whose identity remains unknown, provided the crucial information that broke the case open. This led to increased promotion of tip lines and rewards for information in cold cases. Perhaps most significantly, the case sparked a national conversation about how institutions handle reports of inappropriate conduct by people in positions of authority. Morrison's decades-long pattern of boundary violations with students had been reported multiple times, but never seriously investigated. The case prompted many universities to review and strengthen their Title IX policies and reporting procedures. Carleton College, where both victims had been students and Morrison had been a teaching assistant, established the Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton Memorial Scholarship for students studying journalism and education, the fields the 2 women had hoped to enter. The college also implemented new safety measures, including improved lighting on campus walkways, expanded escort services, and enhanced training for faculty about appropriate professional boundaries. The case also influenced how law enforcement approaches missing persons investigations involving college-age adults. In 1985, Jennifer and Amy's disappearance had been initially downplayed because they were legally adults. Modern protocols emphasize that adults can be victims of foul play just as children can, and that the first 48 hours are critical regardless of the victim's age. Detective Sarah Chen, whose persistence had helped solve the case, became a leading voice in cold case investigation. She lectured nationally about the importance of bringing fresh eyes to old evidence and leveraging new technology to solve seemingly unsolvable crimes. The Walsh-Thornton case taught me that we can never give up, Chen said at a forensic science conference in 2024. Families deserve answers, victims deserve justice, and advances in technology mean cases that were unsolvable a decade ago might be solvable today. We owe it to the victims and their families to keep trying. The anonymous tipster's identity remained one of the case's enduring mysteries. Speculation ranged from someone who had witnessed Morrison disposing of evidence to someone who had heard a deathbed confession to Morrison himself seeking to unburden his conscience. The truth may never be known, but the impact of that 2:47 a.m. email was undeniable. In Northfield, the case's resolution allowed the community to finally begin healing. A permanent memorial to Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton was erected on Carleton's campus, a quiet garden bench where students can sit and reflect. A plaque reads, "In memory of Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton, whose bright futures were stolen, but whose memory inspires us to look out for one another and to never give up seeking truth and justice." Crescent Lake, once just a recreational spot, took on new meaning. The beach where divers had entered to recover the submerged Honda became an unofficial memorial site. People leave flowers there, particularly on February 15th, the anniversary of the disappearance, and on September 29th, the anniversary of the conviction. The case also influenced popular culture. True crime podcasts devoted multiple episodes to the investigation. A documentary film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2025, focusing on Detective Chen's investigation and the family's long wait for justice. The story resonated because it contained elements everyone could relate to: the vulnerability of youth, the betrayal of trust, the persistence of love, and the eventual triumph of truth. For those closest to Jennifer and Amy, life continued in the shadow of their loss. Katie Walsh Morrison, named decades before David Morrison's crimes were revealed, had changed her last name back to Walsh after the trial. She worked as a journalist, fulfilling the dream her sister never got to achieve. In her reporting, she often focused on cold cases and victim advocacy, carrying forward Jennifer's legacy. Bridget Walsh became a trauma counselor, helping others process grief and loss. She attributed her career choice directly to growing up in the aftermath of her sister's disappearance. "I learned early that trauma doesn't just affect the direct victim," she explained. "It ripples outward, touching everyone in the family, the community. If I can help others navigate that pain, then maybe some meaning can come from what happened to Jennifer." Amy Thornton's childhood friends established a foundation in her name that provides scholarships to children of single parents pursuing higher education, honoring both Amy's memory and her mother Catherine's sacrifices. David Morrison filed an appeal, as expected, but it was denied in 2025. He remains incarcerated at Oak Park Heights, where he keeps mostly to himself, spending his days in the prison library. He has never admitted his guilt or shown remorse. Former inmates who encountered him reported that he maintains his innocence, claiming to be the victim of a forensic error and circumstantial evidence. Whether Morrison will ever confess, whether there were other victims, and whether he will die in prison maintaining his facade of innocence remains to be seen. What is certain is that he will never again have the opportunity to harm anyone. The resolution of the Walsh-Thornton case proved what many in law enforcement believe, that every case, no matter how cold, deserves continued attention. Technology advances, witnesses come forward, anonymous tips arrive, and sometimes, after decades of silence, the truth finally emerges from the depths where it's been hidden. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? Drop a comment below with cases you'd like to see covered. Every unsolved case represents a family still searching, still hoping, still waiting for the closure that finally came to the Walsh and Thornton families after 38 years. As Detective Sarah Chen said at Patrick Walsh's funeral, "This case taught me that justice has no statute of limitations in the hearts of those who seek it." Patrick Walsh spent 38 years searching for his daughter. Catherine Thornton spent 38 years waiting for answers. They never gave up, and because they didn't give up, because they kept the case alive, because they refused to let Jennifer and Amy be forgotten, justice was finally served. We solve cold cases not just for the victims, but for everyone who loved them, for every parent who has lost a child, for every sibling who has lost a brother or sister, for every friend who has lost someone precious. We solve them because that's what we owe to the living and to the dead. Jennifer Walsh and Amy Thornton were 21 years old when they died. They were smart, kind, ambitious young women with their whole lives ahead of them. David Morrison took those lives, but he couldn't take their memory, and he couldn't prevent justice from eventually finding him. No matter how long it takes, no matter how cold the trail becomes, we keep searching, because every victim deserves justice and every family deserves answers. That's the lesson of this case. That's the legacy of Jennifer and Amy. In the end, the Walsh-Thornton case stands as both a tragedy and a triumph. A tragedy because 2 lives were stolen before they were truly lived, because families suffered decades of torment, because a predator walked free for 38 years. But a triumph because persistence won out, because technology caught up to crime, because justice, though delayed, was ultimately served. The case reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when answers seem impossible and hope feels foolish, we must keep searching, keep believing, keep fighting. Because somewhere beneath the surface, literal or metaphorical, the truth is waiting to be discovered. And when it finally emerges into the light after decades in darkness, when justice is finally served no matter how long it took, we are reminded that every case matters, every victim deserves to be remembered, and every family deserves to know the truth. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Walsh-Thornton case. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please subscribe, like, and share with others who appreciate true crime that honors the victims while seeking truth. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. And remember, cold cases are only cold until someone brings the heat. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and I'll see you in the next video.